Elara Vos stood at the edge of the great hall and refused to kneel. Around her, hundreds of wolves waited in silence. They had come from all 7 territories to see the Alpha King make his announcement, and now every eye turned toward the quiet healer who lived on the far edge of the Ironclaw lands. She was not supposed to be important. She had spent her whole life making sure of that. At the front of the hall, on a throne carved from pale stone, sat King Dorian Blackthorn. He was tall, with dark hair and steady grey eyes that seemed to notice everything. He had ruled the 7 territories for 6 years, and in that time he had never once been told no. Until tonight. "I have found my fated mate," the king had said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Then he had looked straight at Elara. "She stands among you now, Elara Vos." A wave of whispers had rushed through the crowd. Fated mates were rare and sacred. To be chosen by the Alpha King himself was an honor beyond dreams. Everyone expected her to weep with joy, to run forward, to kneel before him. Instead, Elara lifted her chin and said, clearly and calmly, "No." The whispers died. The silence that followed was so heavy it pressed against her chest. She could feel her heart pounding, but she did not look away from the king. Dorian's expression did not change, yet something flickered behind his eyes, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. For a long moment he simply studied her, as if she were a puzzle he had not expected to solve tonight. "You refuse me," he said at last. It was not a question. "I do," Elara answered. She waited for anger. She waited for him to command her, to force the bond upon her, the way old stories said kings once did. But Dorian only leaned back in his throne and folded his hands together. "Then you shall have 30 days, he said. 30 days to change your mind. During that time you will stay in the fortress as my guest. If, at the end, you still refuse, you may go home, and I will never speak of this again." The crowd gasped. No one refused the king, and no king let a refusal stand. But Elara only nodded once. 30 days, she agreed. She did not tell him why she had said no. She did not tell him about her mother. Years ago, before Dorian had taken the throne, the old king had ruled with cold indifference. When sickness had swept through the outer villages, he had done nothing. Healers had begged for supplies and help, and the crown had ignored them. Elara's mother, herself a gifted healer, had worked until she could no longer stand, trying to save others. In the end, she had caught the sickness too, and there had been no one left with the strength to save her. Elara had been a child then. She had held her mother's hand as she faded, and she had made a promise she never intended to break. She would never bind herself to a crown. She would never trust a king to care for the people beneath him. Kings, she believed, saw wolves as pieces on a board, to be moved and sacrificed as they pleased. And now a king wanted to make her his queen. So she stayed in the fortress, but she kept her walls high. The first days were tense. Elara wandered the stone halls like a shadow, speaking to no one unless she had to. She expected the king to summon her, to pressure her, to remind her of the honor she was refusing. He did none of these things. He left her alone, and somehow that unsettled her more than pressure would have. She began to watch him from a distance, and what she saw slowly confused her. She had expected a proud, distant ruler who sat on his throne and let others do his work. Instead, she found a king who rose before dawn. She saw him in the training yards, not shouting orders but helping young soldiers who had fallen behind. One morning she watched him carry water himself to the sick bay, where wounded wolves rested after a border patrol had gone wrong. He knelt beside a hurt soldier, spoke to him gently, and stayed until the young wolf smiled. This was not the king of her nightmares. Still, she told herself it could be an act. Powerful people knew how to perform kindness when others were watching. She kept her distance. But there was something else she could not explain. Whenever she came near Dorian, his wolf grew restless. She could sense it beneath his calm surface, like a strong current under still water. His hands would tighten, his breathing would change. It was as though a part of him strained toward her, fighting to break free of the man's control. He never let it show for long. But she felt it, again and again, and she did not understand it. On the 8th day, everything changed. A child was carried into the fortress, pale and shaking, burning with fever. The healers who examined the boy stepped back with fear in their eyes. Elara pushed forward before she could stop herself. Old instincts, her mother's instincts, took over. She pressed her hand to the child's forehead and felt the sickness inside him. It was not an ordinary fever. It was something dark and wrong, something that pulled at his life like a hook. She had never felt anything like it, and yet a cold memory stirred in her. This was how the old sickness had felt, the one that had taken her mother. "When did this start?" she demanded. 3 days ago, a healer whispered, and he is not the only one. 2 elders have fallen ill in the lower village, and a pup only last night. Elara's blood went cold, a spreading sickness, the very thing she had feared her whole life. She did not hesitate. She rolled up her sleeves and went to work. The next days blurred together. Elara barely slept. She moved from bed to bed, using every ounce of her gift to hold back the illness. Her healing magic glowed soft and warm from her hands as she eased fevers and calmed pain. But the sickness was strong, stronger than she was. She could slow it, but she could not stop it. Every time she saved one wolf, 2 more fell ill. The whole pack began to fear. Parents held their children close. The great hall, once full of celebration, grew quiet and grim. Through it all, Dorian was there. He did not hide in his throne room. He walked the sick bay at Elara's side, carrying supplies, comforting frightened families, staying awake through the long nights just as she did. And each night, his wolf grew more and more restless, until Elara could feel it crackling in the air between them. One night, near the end of her strength, Elara collapsed into a chair beside a sleeping patient. Her hands trembled, her eyes burned. She had saved the child from the first day, but the sickness still spread, and she did not know how to win. Dorian knelt beside her. "You have not rested in 3 days," he said quietly. "You will make yourself ill. If I stop, they die," she whispered. "I have seen this before. I watched it take my mother. I will not watch it take these children too." Something in his face shifted. A deep sorrow filled his eyes. And then his control broke. She felt it happen. The current beneath the still water finally surged free. His wolf rose up inside him, and when Dorian spoke again, his voice was layered, both man and wolf together. "There is something you must know," the wolf said. "Something he has kept from you." Elara stared, too shocked to move. "This sickness is not natural," the wolf went on. "It is a curse. It was placed on the royal bloodline long ago, meant to weaken every pack under the crown. It sleeps for years, then wakes and spreads, and no ordinary healer can stop it. It nearly destroyed the packs once before, in the time of the old king." Elara's breath caught. The sickness that had killed her mother. The curse. "But there is a cure," the wolf said, and now its glowing eyes fixed on her with fierce hope. "The curse can only be broken by the bond between the Alpha King and his true fated mate, when that mate is a healer. Together, the 2 of them hold power enough to burn the curse away, not from one wolf, but from every pack in every territory, all at once." Slowly, Dorian regained control. The wolf's presence sank back beneath the surface, and the man returned, breathing hard, his face pale. "That is why I did not tell you," he said, his voice rough. "I feared you would think I only wanted you to save myself, to save my crown. I did not want you to bond with me, out of duty or fear." He looked away. "My mother was forced into her bond. She never chose it, and she was never happy. I swore I would never do that to anyone. When I found you, I wanted your choice to be free, even if it meant you chose to leave." Elara sat very still. Everything she had believed about him, about kings, began to crack. "You knew this whole time," she said slowly, "that our bond could save your people, and you still let me refuse you." "Yes," he said simply. "You would have let them suffer rather than force me. I hoped you would come to trust me," he said. "But I would not steal your choice, not even to save my own life." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. In the quiet, Elara heard the soft breathing of the sick child she had saved, and remembered another child, long ago, holding her dying mother's hand. She had spent her whole life believing that kings saw wolves as pieces to be sacrificed, but here was a king who would rather sacrifice himself than force a single unwilling heart. "Tell me the truth," she said. "If I refuse, and I go home, what happens to you?" Dorian was silent. "Tell me," she pressed. "The curse grows strongest in the king," he admitted at last. "It will take me, and when the Alpha King falls, the packs fall with him. I have perhaps a season left, maybe less." He had known, all this time, through every night in the sick bay, he had known that he was dying, and he had chosen to spend his last strength comforting frightened families instead of saving himself. Elara stood up. Her legs were weak, but her mind was suddenly clear. She had built her walls to protect herself from a king like the old one, a king who did not care. But Dorian was not that king. He had spent his whole reign trying to undo the harm the old crown had caused. He had tended the sick with his own hands. He had honored her choice above his own life. And somewhere in these long, hard days, without her ever meaning to let it happen, she had come to care for him. "I was wrong about you," she said softly. Dorian looked up. "I thought you were like the king who let my mother die," she continued. "But you are the opposite of him. You would have died in silence rather than take one thing from me that I did not freely give." She swallowed hard. "So let me give it freely now." His eyes widened. "Elara, I choose you," she said, "not to save the pack, though I want to save them. Not out of duty. I choose you because I have watched you these past days, and I have seen who you truly are, and my heart chose you before my mind was ready to admit it." For the first time since she had met him, the king's careful control fell away, and pure, open hope shone on his face. "You are certain?" he asked. "I have never been more certain of anything," she said. They performed the bonding ritual that very night, in the heart of the fortress, with the sick and the frightened all around them. As their bond formed, Elara felt the king's wolf rush to meet her own, and the two became one in a way she had never imagined possible. Warmth flooded through her, deeper and brighter than any healing she had ever done alone. Then her power woke fully. Light poured from her, gold and clean and endless. It flowed into Dorian, and through him, out into the bond that connected him to every pack in every territory. Elara felt the curse for the first time in all its darkness, a heavy, ancient shadow wrapped around the royal line and reaching into every corner of the seven lands. And she felt it break. The light swept through the fortress, and the sick children stirred and opened their eyes. It rushed beyond the walls, over the hills, across the borders, into every village and den. Fevers cooled, pain melted away. Elders who had been fading sat up with clear eyes. The darkness that had haunted the packs for generations dissolved like mist under a rising sun. When it was over, Elara stood swaying, tears on her face, held upright by Dorian's strong arms. Around them, wolves who had been dying were laughing and weeping and holding one another. The child from the first day ran to her and hugged her legs. "You did it," Dorian breathed. "You saved them all." "We did it," she corrected gently. "Together." The news spread quickly through the 7 territories. The curse was broken. The sickness was gone, and it had been broken by the king and the healer who had once refused him. The wolves who had gasped at her defiance now cheered her name. She was not a reluctant bride. She was their queen and their savior. In the days that followed, Elara and Dorian ruled side by side. She did not become a quiet figure behind the throne. She stood beside him as an equal, her voice as strong as his in every decision. Together, they changed the kingdom. They built new healing houses in every village, so that no family would ever be ignored, the way her mother's had been. They ruled with partnership instead of power alone, with care instead of cold command. Months later, on a bright morning, Elara found herself standing once more in the great hall where it had all begun. It was the same room where she had lifted her chin and told the Alpha King no in front of the whole pack. This time she stood at the front, at Dorian's side, wearing the mark of the Queen. The hall was full again, but now the wolves gathered in joy, not fear. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows and fell across the pale stone floor. Dorian took her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. That night you almost walked away? Ilara looked out at the faces of the pack she had once distrusted, the pack she had saved, the pack that was now truly her own. She thought of her mother, and she felt, for the first time in many years, that the promise she had made as a grieving child had finally been kept in a way she never expected. She had found a crown worthy of her trust after all. "No," she said, and she smiled. "I only had to be brave enough to change my mind." And in the great hall where she had once refused to kneel, the healer who had saved her people stood tall beside the king she had chosen freely, and knew that she was exactly where she belonged.